What's up, good people? Michael here, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo4Politics. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for just simply engaging in the entire process. This is a special bulletin titled Shift Change 2.0. Why? Because this is a pivotal moment for United Airlines Flight Attendants. Last year, as you recall, for those who've been following the Shift Change series, union members rejected a tentative agreement, sending a clear message to union leadership: things have not gone far enough. Now, a new deal is on the table, tentative agreement 2. It does include higher pay and stronger contract language, but there's still those who still say those gains may come with real costs to workers. Now, what happens next won't shape just paychecks and working conditions for thousands of employees at United Airlines, but it could also set the tone for labor negotiations across the airline industry and beyond. At a time when workers are demanding more, how this vote unfolds may influence how companies negotiate, how unions advocate, and how far workers feel empowered to push for the change they deserve. Now, joining me in this discussion is no other than Ken Diaz. He's the Master Executive Council President of United Airlines Flight Attendant Work Group. He is the lead negotiator in this terms, and he's a recurring guest on the podcast. You may check past episodes on a platform you're watching or listening, or you can check the website Cuckoo4Politics.com for all past episodes. Now, he himself has made himself available, which we are very grateful on this podcast. He will share his unique perspective on the environment at the negotiating table and the terms that were laid out in this TA2. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cuckoo4Politics. Let's dive into some thoughtful and engaging conversation while learning something together. Ken Diaz, welcome back to another episode of Cuckoo4Politics. I appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule in the midst of another vote. To our members, thank you for joining us on this episode. Let's take it back. Last year we did several segments on shift change, and along with Sarah Nelson, the AFA International President. In those segments on shift change series, we talked about the contract, the environment, the negotiation style, behind the scenes, so members have an understanding, the terminologies, what was at stake. Members resonated, they understood. However, they rejected the tentative agreement that was presented. That was probably a blow, because you and Sarah and the rest of the leadership that makes up Flight Attendant Work Group, they were passionate, but democracy prevails and the members voted. How did you feel when the outcome came about that the voters rejected, not small amount, but unanimous?
In any negotiations, Michael, we have to present a TA when we reach a TA to the membership to vote on. All 100% agreed that we had pushed Scott Kirby and his management team as far as they were going to go. That's obvious from changes that they did in TA2, but that was the furthest we can get them. And it's our obligation then to present that to the members. I think I talked in previous sessions, in negotiations, every single line in that contract has monetary value to it. And that's why you have all the company's finance team. That's why you have our outside actuaries and people that work in benefits. Dan Akins has worked with every union on the property, worked with Southwest, Alaska. He worked with American. He's been doing it for 30 years. So he battles the company's finance team. It's because they have their model. We have our model as far as costing is concerned. And you're trying to get it as close to possible where you agree on the numbers. Because don't forget, we sign NDAs, so the books are open. We know what the books are of United when we're doing this. When the vote came out, I was surprised by the amount of the negative vote, with 71%. I did what the MEC president would do, and you listen to the members and find and dig into what was it in TA1 that needed to be improved. And that's why we surveyed the members. Now, I was disappointed in the percentage of those that returned the survey, because if we don't know the reasons why people voted no, how do you go back into a TA2 negotiation to negotiate the priorities? Now, some things that were clearly evident in the survey results that came back, the sit time was outrageous at United, the 359 sits, 355 sits, no compensation for that. Some pushback about the boarding pay being delayed, not going in right at dated signing, so we knew we had to fix that. Issues that came up in the survey that ranked towards the top about the hotel language, not understanding the changes that were made in TA1, that we had to tighten up the language, address the concerns that we saw in the survey. So there was the reserve availability periods for wraps that came back in the surveys. They want it from the 14 to 12. There was a misunderstanding during all of TA1 conversation that they were viewing the reserve availability periods as a duty period. And it wasn't. A time frame of the day where scheduling could contact you and you could have a certain amount of time off each day where you didn't have to worry about waiting for the phone calls or anything like that. So I think we've explained it better in TA2. I mean, you get disappointed anytime a TA is rejected. What I am glad about is if a TA is going to be rejected, it can't be by 5347. It's very hard to negotiate any improvements going back in if it wasn't a sound, resounding no vote. And it was. I don't take that personal. I don't take it any other way than we worked for the members, and the members said no, overwhelmingly no, and we had to improvements in TA2. Now, one thing I will say that I said in TA1, the 480 was a contentious issue in TA1. I had said in TA1, this is coming from the top of the corporation. It's their line in the sand. I think I even made comments, a 480 would be in a TA2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever. That's one point they weren't giving up on. But we really worked hard, and I'll go into that later about improvements that we made in 480, because don't forget TA1, 480 was flight credit hours. So anything you got in ad pay that had to do with hours, was not being calculated into that 480. I won't name her for her own privacy, but you know her as well as I know her from JFK. I mean, she was an adamant no because she ran into medical conditions and she was out a whole 12 months. And she thought because she was out, she wouldn't have qualified for the 40. She absolutely would have qualified for the 40. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes when people go out on a medical leave, you have some sick time hours. And we have negotiations in our contract that go well past what some other airlines were. So she used up all her sick hours, okay? So it was in the hundreds. Those hundreds of sick hours alone qualified her for the 480. Because after she ran out of sick hours, then she's just on a regular medical leave. But had she had no sick hours, even though she was out for 12 months, she was on an approved leave of absence, a medical leave of absence. So she would have gotten 40 hours credit reduced every month off the 480. So she made the 480 just by being out on a 12-month medical leave. So nothing would have happened to her benefits. So there was a lot of confusion over that. And I think TA1 rejection, don't forget, there were hundreds of items we closed out in a matter of months. So we were so busy at the negotiating table that the education part of that wasn't ready 100% to go out when we presented TA1. The difference in TA2 is every single time we reached an agreement on something, we also had a whole team in the background writing education materials, doing short videos, because not everyone wants to read through 507 pages. We did short videos so they could have a better understanding. So I actually think the resource page, and I still today tell people before they vote, go to unitedfacontract.org. There is every question, there's FAQs, there's videos, there's articles. But I think on these podcasts with you, I can start to tell you why something was there and why something wasn't there. We can't be one issue voters because you can't possibly meet 31,000 flight attendants, one issue, okay? Industry leading is not meaning every single provision in the contract is industry leading. It means the total value of the contract compared to the main competitors, American and Delta. I know people like to compare us to Southwest. I know they like to say Southwest makes more money than us. Let me put that out right now. That is 100% false. by the way that they're paid with their short flying and their hours. When you compare it and compare it to American, Alaska, United, and you do the comparisons, we 100% make more money flying than Southwest. Not to discredit Southwest. They have a good contract that they took 6 years to get. But 4 years and 9 months into this negotiations, we have the highest pay in the industry, including we calculated in that there may be a 4% raise coming from Delta during this ratification. And sure enough, it did. We included that. We are still the highest paid in the industry.
You said a lot. You had to reassess. There were some changes made, and that's an adjustment. That's just holding yourself accountable. The critique, again, at 480 minimum, it would seem like a concession to members only because if you're, particularly on the sub-UA side, pre-merger United Flight Attendants never had to pay for health insurance. Mm-hmm. Then the merge operation came in with Continental, and then members were introduced to paying for health insurance. So that's a pay cut. And then now with this TA1 and TA2, 480. The concern is, okay, there's another concession. What will prevent the company from increasing minimums for the next contract round?
So let me talk about the 480 because that has been a contentious issue. Let me put it right out there, something that probably should have been said in TA1. 480 is a concession. We don't have it today. It is the only concession we have in TA2. People are comparing what we lost in bankruptcies, what we lost 25 years ago. Michael, this is a completely different industry than 25 years ago. We cannot get back everything we lost in bankruptcy. When I say a concession, I'm saying a concession from your current contract, okay? We didn't give up work rules in this contract. We beat off over 110 concessions that have been in these negotiations for TA1 and TA2. And they actually put some more concessions up in TA2, getting rid of PTO. Originally, they only wanted to pay retropay to the end of the period from TA1. We looked at them. Are you insane? The retropay has to be higher, okay, because you're 9 months later. And Michael, we got not only higher, we got 25% more higher in payout in retro than we had in TA1. But here's another misconception in TA2. So people are seeing a year there where the percentage went down. Let me explain how retro pay is done. A lot of it is speculative because you need to get your wages back from when it was amendable. So let's use an example in TA2. I'm going to go into COVID a little, so that gets a little tricky because that was a contentious thing too. 21 and 22, you wouldn't have gotten 4% raises, but you're getting 4% retro pay. So you are getting more retro pay for those years than you would have ever gotten in 21 and 22. And then what all airlines do, pilots, flight attendants, when you finally push them and fight them to get the pool of amount of money for retro, then you have to decide, because there's all different percentages to do it. I mean, we could have kept the percentage that we lowered that was in TA1, but we would have had to lower some of the other percentages plus the last year percentage to get to the final pot total of money that we should have gotten paid. I saw a post just yesterday on Facebook. This is less retro pay than TA1. Absolutely 1,000% categorically wrong. Now, could there be the few flight attendants that in that 1 year that was the highest for TA1 and then they didn't fly high in 25? Yeah. Could there be a little difference there? Yeah. But overall, and this is from an actuary that is not a United employee, that has looked at United's books, that has looked at our retro, that has looked at American's retro, that US Air's retro. Don't forget, there's some airlines that didn't get retro. When all that calculation is in, this is the highest retro payment in the history of a flight attendant contract. There is no airline that comes close. And our formula is even higher than our own ALPA pilots. Yes, they get a higher payout, based on their higher wages. Anyone that wants to keep saying that false claim on social media, please don't take that as facts. They're not actuaries. They weren't in there. They didn't see the books of United. They didn't see what we saw as there was no money that could be hidden in these negotiations, because that's why we sign NDAs. There's information that we know that none of the competitors know, that actually some of Wall Street that doesn't know, because they had to open their books and we had to keep them honest, because don't forget, they try to overcharge us for things. Our retropay on average is $3,600 more per flight attendant than TA1.
So let me just clarify a couple of things or point out. NDAs or non-disclosure agreements. So members of the negotiating team have to sign this document not to share intel, you would say, to the competitors. We, the members, have to trust that what you're seeing is actual and it's verified, but you can't just spill the beans for own self.
And let me just say, every union in this country has to sign those agreements, because United has to open their entire books. They can't fudge it, okay? So we see every single cost, everything coming in, the projections going forward, because that's important to know. Everything in that contract has a cost. We said in TA1, we would probably have to move around some items. Well, just to get sick pay wasn't to get compensation for flight attendants. The idea behind sick pay is that they change how pairings are made so that they have less time that's not compensated, where you're not getting paid for sits. An example, you have a pairing and your duty day is Newark to Denver. You have a sit and you go Denver to LA, okay? And you could have a 12-hour and 30-minute duty day. Your flight time could be around 7 hours. So there's 5 hours and 30 minutes there that you weren't doing anything. You weren't getting boarding time. You weren't getting sick pay. But would you not rather, if you had a 12-hour and 30 duty day with all these provisions we brought into TA2, to now possibly get 9 hours a block or 9.5, rather than that just over the 1-for-2 rig? If you're going to come to work, you want to be paid. And that will change because they're going to change the optimizer. You'll have less sits, so you'll be doing boardings, you'll be doing more actual block hours, because that's why you come to work. I mean, that's how you make your money in this industry.
I would say, as an active employee, I understand that. However, I'm on that sit in Denver waiting to go to LA, but now there's a rolling delay because of weather or mechanical. Am I not being compensated, or I'm just sitting there again?
So I'm glad you answered that, because that question has come up since the TA came out. So when people unions negotiate a sit pays sort of thing, they're called different things at the carriers. Mostly all our pilots, I will tell you, are 2 hours on their sits. The reason for that, pilots don't get paid boarding pay, okay? So that's just the industry. There are a couple of carriers that have 2. There's some that have actual. There's some that have schedule. On your example you gave, that would be an actual. So you have a creeping delay. They would get paid the actual. Let me throw the opposite in there, because it can go either way. There's pluses and minuses. You start your flight in Newark, okay? You are going to Denver. You have a 3-hour and 45-minute sit. But your flight from Newark, now don't forget, sit is in between flights. You have a flight from Newark to get you to Denver, and it's 2.5 hours late. And you get to Denver, and there's only really an hour between your flight. If you were actual, you would get 0. Under ours, you get the scheduled, even though you didn't sit the scheduled. Even though when you got to Denver, you only had an hour between flights. So it works both ways, Michael, is what I'm trying to say. And that's, a lot of people don't understand that.
So I see the trade-off. It's similar
so it works both ways, is what I'm saying. So yes, in your example, no. In the examples I'm giving you, you never sat that time. Or here's another example. Your flight gets canceled. You're subject to reassignment. You don't get a reassignment. You still get paid that set scheduled sick pay for your flight that canceled because it's based on scheduled. So it works both ways. And when you equate it out, it comes pretty even because there's two opposite scenarios that could be happening. And I will tell you, to get sick pay, this is how every airline does it. So take a look back when they could schedule you up to 359 sits. They cost all that out for that last year, and they come out a figure as to what they would have had to pay in sick pay. And it's huge. In the tens and tens and tens and tens and tens, read between the lines, tens and tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars. Okay? That is charged to the union because Scott Kirby already said, because you have to realize, TA2, our current contract, worth $16 billion. Our TA2 takes us to I believe it's almost $22.3 billion. That is a $6.3 billion increase in this contract compared to your current JCBA. Unheard of in flight attendant negotiations. Way over the cost of the American contract. And I wish people would really do the research on Delta. Delta will always throw money at the wages. To say, oh, look at us, non-union, and look at, we're making that nickel less or nickel more than United. Did you ever ask a Delta flight attendant what happens when their trip falls apart? Did you ever ask a Delta flight attendant what's covered in their health insurance policies? Did you ever ask a Delta flight attendant how much cost share they do on their inferior medical policies? Ours is all delineated in the contract, every single thing that has to be included in your medical insurance. Delta, the whole company gets offered it. Today, his wife works there, okay? There's no way in hell she would take that policy. So she takes her husband's here at United.
Now, this is good because I hope to interview Delta flight attendants because I know they're in the process of pro-union and trying to unionize. You said a couple of things. Again, it jogs my memory, but I do want to close out on this retro pay. Why is the retro pay being paid out at the end of the year versus, or towards like September, I believe? Why not do it at the date of signing?
Michael, who are you employed by? No,
I won't say.
Who are you employed by?
Well, all right. For this context, yes, United Airlines.
Okay, and yeah. I am too.
Yeah.
Okay, and usually the sky falls when United talks to you. So what season are we coming into flying?
We're coming to the summer peak travel season at this time.
Okay. So United, because the sky is going to fall, tens of thousands of flight attendants are going to leave because of retro pay. That's also a false statement. They'll be a good size, but that's a false statement. Oh my God, how will we run the summer flying with 40 to 50% more flying? We won't have the flight attendants to do it. We need the payment in October 15th or so. And we looked at them. Let's see. We get the TA in March. If it's ratified, it goes in May 31st. And you want to wait to the same time limit you had for TA1 when we got to a TA later in the year? Listen, there are going to be flight attendants that leave when they get the retro pay, okay? And it is going to affect the summer operation, you know. Yes, they were doing hiring, but they were doing hiring on the advanced flying. They, in their mind, couldn't take a chance that they would lose a significant number of flight attendants in the summer to get it to right after the summer season closes and Labor Day is over with. It has to be paid no later, not on September 15th, no later than September 15th. I don't know why there wasn't an outcry in TA1 because did the same thing. They were into October And no one cried, why are they waiting a couple of months to pay TA1's retro? But here's the other thing, Michael. People think it's really, really easy. They have to get all the last 3 months. They're not going to expand a payroll department just because there's this one time that they have to pay retropay. So, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that on the back end. There's so much back work that goes into the processing of a retro. And let's get this out of the point right now. I know the company has to call it one-time payment. Every airline called it one-time payment because if not, they would be fined for all back lost wages if they said it was just retropay that they didn't put into your check, when really it's only an estimation of what all those raises would have been. Our calculations are a true retro formula because it's based on your earnings each year, where in the past, you remember, they were just signing bonuses. So whatever the company calls it, it's being taxed at 22% federal withholding. You poor people in the Northeast might have state tax. I don't have state tax, okay? So your state taxes are different, but it still depends on how you file at the end of the year, where your bracket is, if you're married, if you're single. And it was important to get it as a separate check, because if it was ever in your payroll check, you would have had a larger portion because it would put you into a different tax bracket.
I'm glad you clarified the whole retro, because people do often say, why isn't a signing bonus? But I think that terminology has been explained to exhaustion.
Yeah, every airline has done it. Every work group has done it. It's based on a retro formula. Let them call it, their Halloween extra holiday pay.
Clarify also that sit time rig, because you gave clear examples with the Newark going to Denver to LA and vice versa. Your flight time, you're scheduled to land at 1 p.m. and you're paid until 1 p.m. and then debriefing and so forth. But the headwinds were great and you landed at 12. Sometimes you could be in your parking lot, in a car, at home, and the clock is still pinning. So sometimes it goes back and forth.
Because it goes both ways. That's the point I was trying to make. So you can come up with hundreds of examples.
I want to lead my way into retirement. Mm-hmm. There was only a 1% increase to the flight attendant work group, but the pilot work group got a 17% jump in there.
Well, not a 17% jump at one time. Yes, they're up to a very high double digit, but you do know the difference, right?
Why is it union was not able to negotiate a higher percentage? I guess it's the same as was in TA1.
Easy to explain. So if you look at pilots across the industry, for the most part, it's the same. They're way much higher in their retirement than any flight attendant group. So United, when they're costing out...
Because they're forced to retire at a certain age.
Well, they're forced to retire at 65 years old. We do have flight attendants working after 65, right?
Oh yeah. I work with one who's 75 years old, but very, great at his job.
If we had, which we will never have, a mandatory retirement age at 65, of course, over the years, you would have had to been negotiating much higher. And the company would be willing because, there's only so many years you get to make your retirement money. Listen. You know what pilots make, okay? They make huge salaries, but based on their work over the years and everything like that. So obviously they try to maintain their lifestyle when they retire. And because they retire at 65, flight attendants in this industry will never have the same percentages going into that because we don't have mandatory retirement age, and it's costed against all the competitors. Let me talk about the 1% because people just use the number 1 and are not thinking what it actually does to your retirement. For that 1% increase, and because of the higher wage scale, and yes, we got a higher wage scale than TA1, because we were basing it on all airlines' October 2026 rates, what they would be estimating deltas, which it proved right. They gave the 4% raise like they've been doing the last couple of years. That 1%, because of the higher wage rates on day one, This is including your 2 raises that first year, May 31st, and then for the August bid schedule. It's counting your 2 raises. It's counting your boarding pay. It's counting, and don't forget what I forgot to mention about sit time. Say you get paid for sit time, it overlaps with boarding, and it's totally separate. You get the sit time until the flight departs, but you're also getting that boarding time ahead of one. So you're getting double. You're getting 2 different pay components. They're separate from each other. So you're not only getting sit, you're getting boarding pay all in that time.
Also eligible for holding pay after this sit time? I'm not after the boarding pay, scheduled boarding pay?
Yeah, because you could board and then you could have passengers on there and, that's delaying. So then holding pay comes into there. So with all these pay components, it equals for that 1% for your whole 5 and 4, 43% more cash every paycheck going into your retirement, whether you're pre-merger Cal, whether you're pre-merger United, whether you're a new hire, it's 43%. If $1,000 is going into your 401k, okay, it's going to be $1,430 going into your 401k. So there's 43% more cash every single time you have money taken out for your 401k just based on the 1% increase.
No, that makes sense because the number we focus on is at 1%, but not looking at the other variables or components. That holding pay is still the first 30 minutes after. It wasn't decreased.
That didn't change.
That didn't change, and that's unfortunate. Here we go. Let's talk about the scope clause, because I think there is a concern, a reservation that we gave up, like again, the 480, how we began that discussion. It was a concession. Is the scope clause, did we give up something to get?
Scope clause had nothing to do with the 480. The 480 came from Scott Kirby. There wasn't much to pay for because it wasn't valued that much. That's a philosophical thing with him. The way you're wording that question, which has been worded to me and others in both TAs, people think we gave up something in scope to get something. Yeah, we got something. Much stronger scope provisions. So we didn't change anything in Section 1. It remains the same. We didn't change anything in our letter in the back of the book about scope, because our scope protects the work United Flight Attendants do on flights. What our scope has never had, no airline will ever negotiate the provisions I'm going to tell you about with a flight attendant group. They just don't. They negotiate it with the pilots. So people have to go to the ALPA agreement, because the added paragraph, and it's an added paragraph, it didn't take away anything from our scope, except, I'll get to it. Not everyone knows about the Air Wisconsin. You do, because we were involved from pre-merger United. When they had that controlling interest in Air Wisconsin, we filed a grievance, we were successful, and all flight attendants got a payout based on they couldn't have their own subsidiary or controlling interest, because that violated our scope language. Today, because of that Air Wisconsin decision, United, multi-billion-dollar company, found a way around that whole Air Wisconsin decision, okay? So in our contract, there's nothing to say how much flying they can pull from mainline and give to a variety of United Express carriers. No provision that stops that today. The provision that stops that today at certain points is the pilot agreement. Now, the pilot agreement has not only how many planes they can have for United Express, how many seats can be in the planes. During COVID, they had to take some seats out of their planes from 76 down to 70. They have ratios of their flying that they can do. They have limitations on hub-to-hub flying that they can do. All of the restrictions are in the pilot agreement. So this is how it's strengthened, because the Me Too to all of those restrictions, because they wouldn't negotiate the restrictions with us, we tie on to all those restrictions for United Express flying. So then people say, oh, Ken, but the committee let them own a wholly owned subsidiary. And I say, oh, wow, that's great. And they look at me like I have two heads. So why is it great? You have American that owns theirs. You have Delta that owns theirs. We have all the restrictions that are in place today. They don't have to farm out to all these other United Express carriers. If they wanted, if the TA is ratified, they can get a carrier, but the same restrictions are there. There's no additional flying that can move unless growth, because there's percentages, unless United keeps growing, which they do plan. Those numbers will change, but it protects us because if it was ever violated by the ALPA restrictions, okay, because we don't have them, and they won't negotiate in the industry with flight attendants for them. Now that we have those restrictions, if a United pilot had to be on those flights, a flight attendant on our current United Airlines seniority list would have to be on the flight. But think about it, Michael. Are they going to put a $300 and change pilot flying a United Express flight? Are they at some point going to pay $100 United flight attendant? They wouldn't be making a profit at those wages. So it's there as a protection to put a stop. But here's what it does, because airlines have known to go bypass this, and Norse is doing it right now. So Norse flight attendants are training non-Norse flight attendants to fly on their planes in India. If United, during a downturn, could send jets or aircraft to a foreign carrier, well, currently under the United pilot agreement, pilots would have to go with them. We wouldn't. But say that foreign carrier, for a couple months, oh, we need your planes, we need your pilots. Well, guess what? The contract gets ratified. You need United Airlines Flight Attendants on our system seniority list. So that is the improvement by tying it into the restrictions, something we currently do not have in our contract. And take it another point. United's making tons of money. Okay? So if they had a controlling interest, one of these express carriers, and they made the profits, why wouldn't we want those profits into United Airlines, where we share in the profits? Our profits go up. I mean, it's a win-win. But it stops all that, the wet leasing, everything else that they try to do to go around all the scope provisions. And somebody said, oh, but what if United Airlines pilots gave up their scope provisions?
Exactly.
Michael, you've been in this industry a long time. I've been in this industry from 1983. If you think United Flight Attendant pilots are going to give up their jobs, okay, and give up their chance to make more money behind that seat, it ain't happening.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that scope, because that was a concern. Was it in TA1?
It was not in TA1.
Okay, so it was a new thing. So yeah. As a shock, you're like, wait, where is this coming from?
I should re-clarify that. They did worse in TA1. In TA1, what they were trying to do was take out entire Section 1 and take out our letter of agreement on scope and put a 3-sentence replacing all of our scope. We fought that back in TA1, so it never came in TA1. When we were making progress in TA2, because look around, that's what I'm saying. I tell flight attendants all the time, please get out of your United Airlines bubble. It's just not around what's in our bubble. It's everything that's happening around us, okay? You've heard the Scott Kirby comments. You've heard the merger comments. You heard the American comments. You heard the whispers about JetBlue. You heard about going back into JFK. There's going to be consolidation in this industry. So to get those scope protections in place, no, they couldn't go buy a JetBlue and run a separate carrier. No, they couldn't get, any other carrier that starts falling out by the wayside, because I believe Spirit was just the tip of the iceberg. It's sad. It's unfortunate. I am keeping the politics out of it. I'm just keeping the facts. Fuel prices and costs have doubled for airlines since February 28th, when the war started. Everyone that studies the global oil markets, everyone that knows all the infrastructure that's been damaged in a lot of the locations because of the war could end tomorrow completely. We will be feeling the effects of this into 2027, okay? And that's why consolidation is going to happen. The carriers, wink, wink, that are doing really good. I mean, I don't know if you saw today, the head of the American Airlines Pilots Union actually think Kirby's idea was a great idea.
Why?
Because they see what's happening at American, and I don't disparage other Americans because I have so many friends there.
Yeah.
They're in a crisis of leadership. They're not on the level of American and Delta. But you have to think CEOs are smart. You put feelers out that look so grand. It may be directed at someone totally different. But now you have the chief pilot at American saying, you know what? After I've studied this and thought of this, I don't think this is a bad idea. So consolidation is coming. Now, if you ask my personal opinion, I hope that never happens. I think that would be a terrible merger. I think it would be so complicated and so disruptive to everyone. But I'm going to say something. It's probably going to be controversial because, we were called the fearmongers. I'm coming back to the line July 1st. I announced a year ago I wasn't running for re-election. I'm working under the same contract as you, okay? And if a merger came, I want our contract settled because we enter into negotiation of a merger in a higher place for higher improvements rather than what happened to us in our current merger that we completed with Continental, where you had open contracts. You're in a weaker position because of the merger. If you have closed contracts, you can negotiate so much better in a merger than having open contracts. And I never said thank you for having me today, Michael. I appreciate it.
All good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for my closing thoughts. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with Mr. Ken Diaz. I believe the conversation was flowing. Hopefully it added some clarity to the terms. But in fairness, the decision is yours. The decision is yours to make. Stay tuned for the next segment. It's called the debrief. This is where Ken and I will go into some of the terms that we didn't get a chance to finish in this first segment, as far as some terms in the contract. But he's also going to add his perspective on the changes of our environment. The environment here at work, the environment at the corporate level, the changing demographics. There's so many variables that are coming to play that has an influence in our job. Don't forget to vote. Voting closes soon. All right, stay tuned for the debrief. Stay informed, stay engaged. This is Michael, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo4Politics. Until the next episode, stay blessed.